Welcome back to the podcast. Let's talk about what I think might be the worst contract, definitely in the NFL right now, but maybe in NFL history. And that contract is Daniel Jones. If you watched the game last night, I apologize that you also had to sit through that mess. And to be fair, last night is not 100% on Daniel Jones. The team, the offensive line is obviously bad. They obviously are really missing Saquon, but Saquon is hurt again. And this is the weird situation we were talking at the beginning of the year, where the Giants kind of hemmed themselves into this really difficult position where they had to pay Saquon a bunch of money because he's their entire offense. And they had already paid Daniel Jones money, so they're dealing with this cap space. Saquon's hurt again. And that is unfortunate, but he really has not been healthy since he came into the league consistently. So you almost just can't expect him to be, right? And with running backs in modern NFL right now, that seems to be the trend. They get hurt, they struggle, they have problems. So can you really use that as an excuse? I don't think so. Daniel Jones's contract is absolutely ridiculous. And let's put it into perspective how ridiculous this is. I looked up all the contracts of the quarterbacks and I pulled them up average per year, right? Because there's certain players like a Patrick Mahomes, his contract, I'm looking at it over here on my other screen, $450 million contract, which is flat out way more than just anybody else in the league. But per year it breaks down because it's just such a long contract. So let's take a look at this. All right, so we're looking average per year, right? Burrow, Herbert, Lamar, Jalen, some of those new contracts. Russell Wilson might be a debate that potentially he's even worse, but I'm going to make the argument that at least Russell has had previous production and then he just kind of fell off a cliff and we didn't see it coming, or at least they didn't see it coming. You have an excuse. Kyler Murray's not a great contract. Just because it's Kyler Murray. Obviously, Deshaun, I think people would argue with the whole guaranteed thing. But moving down, we find Daniel Jones. And he's in a class of quarterback that I don't think he deserves to be in. He is making more money than Aaron Rodgers, Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, and substantially more. I mean, we're talking than a Jared Goff. That's 33.5 to 40 million. That's $6.5 million more per year on that contract. So we're talking $6.5 million for Daniel Jones over Jared Goff. Let's look at the stats, because we can look at this and I can sit here and I can tell you Jared Goff is a much better quarterback, or that you'd rather have Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr. I think everybody'd agree Aaron Rodgers is the better deal here. The fact that Daniel Jones is making $2.5 million more per year than Aaron Rodgers is pretty ridiculous, right? Look at his stats and look at what he did to earn this $40 million a year contract. So the big year, he just signed this, right? The big year was last year with Dable comes in, right? And they kind of cleaned some stuff up, and he had his best year. Kind of by far. I mean, you could say this 2019 season, he was actually pretty explosive, which is pretty cool. But then 2020, 2021, really pretty bad. Almost even touchdown to interception. But then this is the year. 1 year, he plays all 16 games. You know, there were some injury issues in here as well. Throws for 3,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 picks. 5 picks, that's not a lot, not making a lot of mistakes. He's obviously already done terrible this year with interceptions. A 2-6. That is not good at all. He's been pretty terrible this year, and you might blame this year on that offensive line, and I think you actually could be fair in that. I mean, the guy was sacked, 11 times or something last night? That's just, you can't play quarterback when you're doing that. We were talking about the offensive line with Shedeur at Colorado. It's just impossible, right? Burrow, Mahomes, if you don't have an offensive line, you're going to struggle. But what I want to make the point of is his best year The year that supposedly earned this contract. Let's take a look at the other years that some of his contemporaries have had. Let's take a look at Jared Goff. I was using that example. Let's look at Jared Goff. Jared Goff has a lot longer career history, right? And if you look at these numbers, so we're going to pull them up side by side so we can really follow along with this, okay? So obviously Jared Goff's a little bit older, came into the league in 2016, a few years earlier. But if we're looking at full years, Daniel Jones 16, I would consider the 14 games, 13 games. I think you could consider those somewhat full years. 11 games, that's a little less. So maybe we won't penalize him too much for only throwing for 2,400 yards. But his best year, the year that earned him the contract, he threw for 3,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 picks. Let's look at Jared Goff's numbers. Well, if we just compare with last year, it is not close. 1,200 more yards, 14 more touchdowns, and only 2 extra picks. That's not even close if we're going the year of 2022. And that's not even Goff's best year, right? He's shown in 2018, he threw for almost 4,700 yards, 32 touchdowns, only 12 picks. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Jared Goff is the best quarterback in the league. I'm just comparing Daniel Jones to the other people making less money than him. Right? Remember, Daniel Jones is making substantially more money, $6.5 million a year more than Jared Goff. I don't consider Jared Goff the best quarterback in the league, but I do consider him substantially better than Daniel Jones. He's got a lot more wins. Let's look at a quarterback that makes the same as him, Matt Stafford. All right, Stafford, $40 million a year. Daniel Jones, $40 million a year. They're actually the same total contract size too, 160. Look at Matt Stafford's numbers here. Last time he played a whole season, they won the Super Bowl. That's pretty good. But even the year before at the Lions, before he got traded, he threw for 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, 10 picks. Daniel Jones has never even gotten close to throwing 4,000 yards in a season. And you might say, well, they got Saquon. They got the running game. That's what they do. They allow, Jones, he is a decent runner, right? Had 120 carries last year. What is he doing with his legs? And that is a fair statement. He does run a lot more than somebody like Matt Stafford does, right? But if you're paying a quarterback a lot of money, right, you could make the argument, well, Saquon's really the more important part of the offense. Daniel Jones isn't asked to throw the ball a lot because they want to hand it off to Saquon. That is a perfectly fine strategy. But that strategy doesn't work when you're paying Daniel Jones as if he is the main focal point of your offense. If Daniel Jones is cheap, look at some of these quarterback contracts. A Ryan Tannehill, we talk about, it's more of a Derrick Henry focused offense. He's making $29.5 million, not $40 million. Jimmy G, more of that game manager kind of style that people want to put on him. And people want to compare Daniel Jones. He's a real athletic guy, makes some things happen. We won't talk about, obviously the rookie contracts you can't compare him to. But Jimmy G, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, Ryan Tannehill. I could put Daniel maybe in that category. Especially, I think the best parallel is Ryan Tannehill. So let's look at his stats. Let's look at Tannehill's stats, right? Again, we're looking at 2022 especially close because that's the year that apparently the Giants fell in love with Daniel Jones. 15 touchdowns. Well, let's see what Tannehill did. full season in 2021. We won't use 2022 because that's only 12 games, right? I'm not going to penalize Daniel for having, only 10 touchdowns and 2,400 yards in 2021 when he played 11. I'm not going to penalize Tannehill for only playing 12. If you're injured, you're injured, right? That's fair. The injuries happen. So let's go back to when Tannehill did play. And this is the run-heavy Derrick Henry offense. He threw for 3,700 yards, 21 touchdowns, 14 picks. The year before that, another full season that he had, 3,800 yards. When Tannehill plays a full year, he throws for 37, 38. Back when he was in Miami, and it wasn't maybe as run heavy, he was throwing for 4,000. But in Tennessee, in what many would call a kind of a similar style offense, the running back is really kind of the star. He's still throwing for 3,700 yards, 21 touchdowns, 33 touchdowns. Daniel Jones is throwing half of that in the year that you decide to give him a huge contract. These numbers start to look somewhat similar, right? We start to feel, okay, that's fair. These aren't the big, huge numbers of passing yards, and that's okay because they're run-focused offenses. But he's still throwing for 500 more yards in the season and 6 more touchdowns. You might look at those stats and say, well, he also threw a few extra interceptions, 14-5. That's fair. That's a fair criticism. But we're comparing someone who is making $29.5 million to somebody making $40 million. It's over $10 million more per year. Per year. You're paying $10 million per year for someone who has never in his career demonstrated the ability to be the focal point of your offense. And I'm not saying that having him as a quarterback on your team is a bad idea. But I want him for the Tannehill price, the Jimmy Garoppolo price, the Geno Smith price. I don't want to pay Matt Stafford money. I think if we look at the numbers, you can agree. Jared Goff, substantially better, substantially cheaper. Daniel Jones' contract is closer to Josh Allen's contract than it is to Jared Goff's contract. Think about that for a minute. In fact, Daniel Jones' contract is closer to Patrick Mahomes' contract than it is to Jared Goff. If you are the Giants, you have to get rid of him. And I think Daniel Jones still has an opportunity to play in this league. But that contract is so bad, they need to find a way to get rid of him or find a way to move off or find a way to restructure that deal. Because he's just not worth that kind of money. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree. Do you think this is one of the worst contracts ever given out in NFL history? I think this is even worse than the Russell Wilson one, just because Russell at least, has won a Super Bowl and has had huge numbers in years leading up to getting that contract. At least we've seen Russ perform at that level. Same with the Deshaun Watson. The Deshaun Watson's really dumb because it's all guaranteed, so you really can't get out of it. But there is something to be said about, at least we'd seen Deshaun Watson throw for a lot of yards. At least we saw when he was younger as a rookie, one of the only rookie quarterbacks to ever do well against Bill Belichick. That's decent. At least he's had some numbers before. Daniel Jones has never had legit top-tier quarterback pay kind of numbers. So that's my opinion. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you tomorrow.